You're watching ASOTUCon 2024, presented in collaboration with Reynolds and Gubagoo.
Thanks to our studio partner, Automotive Mastermind, and our panel partner, Effective, for making this panel happen.
I've had this continuum. If you've been following me yesterday through panels in moderation, I've had this continuum of data conversations, and I think this one really slams it home a little bit. So we're talking the future of addressable advertising, precision targeting in automotive marketing. Way down there at the end, I've got Anthony Gingoli. He's the Director of Automotive Strategy and Partnerships at Effective, with over 20 years of experience driving strategic marketing execution across the industry. Right next to me, I've got Joel Bassam. Nailed it? Yes. He's the president of Eastern's Automotive Group. If you're on the main stage today, you heard a bit from him. Started working at the age of 12 at your dad's dealership, and has been all through the dealership and now running it. And then in the middle, Steve White, the CEO and founder of Clairvoy, with over 15 years in digital marketing at this point. So, gents, thanks for joining me up here. So I want to kick this off with Anthony. Because Anthony, you are obviously with Effective, and sorry, I'm getting to my notes here, but oh no, you know what I want to kick it off with? I want to try again. Are you okay with it? It's a small sample size. Did anybody over the last week and a half see a commercial on connected TV anywhere where they might be watching Netflix, Hulu, anything like that for ASOTUCon? Anybody? Come in, Steve. Okay, it's okay. We won't go into it that much. All right. But I want to kick it off with Anthony, because when we talk about precision targeting, and we come with a cable company in the room, everybody's probably like, we smoking something real quick? Give us the reset. Why are you in the room, and why is it important for, just honestly, let's level set that expectation real quick.
I think it's the evolution, right? We've been changing for a long time, and there's a narrative out there that there's a lot of waste and spray and pray. I hear those terms a lot, but that has really evolved and changed. And where we see ourselves is really, we have the best of television, which is quality content, no fraud, highly engaged viewership experience on the big screen. But now we can blend digital into it. We can bring the precision targeting because of the data we have, because of our high-speed internet access into a home. We can deliver ads across all screens, linear, streaming, set-top box, VOD, in a one-on-one environment. And that's how we view addressable now. And that's changing the way we're going to market and how we're showing up for our customers.
Really cool. So if you didn't know that, now you know. He's allowed to be in the precision targeting room, all right? Joel, I want to go to you, because as someone that has a big passion from getting to know you about marketing, not just running a store, and you spent some time actually running that for the stores, not just running the entire operation. We go back, and when I was on stage yesterday talking about specifically the CDP side of this conversation, but we go back when Google AdWords just first came out in the early 2000s, and it was like everybody said, they found the golden archway in the sky, that we were all of a sudden be able to connect every single advertising moment to a sale, right? And that's always been this thing out in the distance now that we desire and crave. But the importance of connecting the data of how we go to market and how we get those people into the retail situation has always been important. When you think about that from the dealer perspective, knowing that you have a desire to both see that, but also capture audiences that you don't know, what are you thinking about today in your desire to capture an audience at a specific time in a specific place?
Well, check. Well, I think there's two ways to kind of answer that question. One is, should you? In the sense of is it even that important to focus so primarily on one portion of the sales funnel? And I think people can kind of lose the forest for the trees there, where this is that AdWords poison that Brian Pash has been preaching for years, is if you're only focused on what you can 100% attribute to, say, this is a cost per lead, you're going to lose a tremendous amount of your sales funnel. And on top of that, we all kind of know the reality of it, which is that isn't the actual full attributed visit to that exact conversion moment. It's a more complex and nuanced sales funnel approach. And so our approach to the market has always been focusing on where we're not as opposed to where we are. And it's interesting. I know you're kind of being a little facetious when it comes to effective having a role in both worlds, but I think of it as important to be in both worlds. It's because when you're buying from a DSP or an OTT vendor or a CTV vendor or whatever acronym they're using, the question isn't not where are you, but where aren't you? That's where I focus. And on top of that is what are you using as your KPI for measurement for success there? And so for us, it's always been about focusing on how do I increase and replicate some kind of over-index of an impression to website visit, because that to me is where a branded, focus on marketing across the entire market that you're in can be effective. If you get too specific, then you're going to miss too much opportunity. If you get too broad, then it's a little bit spray and pray. And if you don't have a presence in those markets, then there's lots of ad waste. But right in that middle spot, if you have the right attribution partner, you can say without a doubt that impression turned into a web visit, which is your best opportunity. And if you're trying to connect an impression to a sale, in my opinion, that's a little bit big of a leap. That's you're hurdling a little far for there. But you can apply the same thing to service.
Yeah. So Steve, you kind of sit honestly in the middle of almost appropriately in the middle of these two
This was planned.
people. This is interestingly planned here. But when we talk about precision targeting, it requires a two-step effort, right? Yeah. It's who are we targeting and where are we targeting them, right? How do you see the industry starting to bridge that gap? Because we've typically relied on other partners to do that for us, the DSP, where the media happens, doing that, and there's sometimes been a gap that needs to be filled. How do you see that being filled in our industry right now?
Yeah, I think that the big trend is going towards addressable environments, going towards the logged in environments, or the authenticated environments, like with an Effective or an Amazon, and to a certain extent like a Trade Desk, but making sure that you're targeting an actual human first. And then also insulating yourself from, the deprecation of the third-party cookie. So being able to do the cookieless campaigns, I think, is huge. And that's why we're excited about, our partnership with Effective in terms of, onboarding the dealer's first-party data and then being able to have, run top-of-mind type of campaigns, I think is huge. And it's like, I made a comment yesterday where I said, I think addressable programmatic is like the modern day newsletter, because when you think about the impact that you can have and have a TV spot in front of your customers, on a regular basis, I think that's huge.
Yeah, Anthony, I'd love to hear there are this being precise requires someone being known, right? Walk us through how we make sure that how you all and how more broadly even you see the industry making sure that we know the person on the other side, because there's multiple avenues at which it can take. Effective takes a couple of them and has some access to some, but what are those avenues that especially maybe dealers or people in the room could be asking their agency, how are they reconciling that end user to make sure that we actually have the person,
Yeah, and I think we have a luxury, right? We're a high-speed internet provider, we're a cable provider, so we own the home in many ways. We know the household address, but more importantly, we know the IP address, and we can reconcile that back to a user. We know who the person is, so if anybody's sharing their data with us and we scrub that against our list, we have a 95% match rate, and now we can go and deliver ads against them. So I think it is critical, because with signal loss going away, there's a lot of campaigns being run out there that are against modeled audience, and there's value in that, but it's not going to be as direct and deterministic as it could be. So I think where we're connecting a lot with some of the CDPs is to enable dealers to give us their first-party data so we can match it and then go deliver that campaign.
Can you define modeled audience for everyone, just so that we level set there. It's not like an expectation. We know what it is.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are getting a lot of different signals, and there's scale that needs to be done, right? Especially in OTT, there's a lot of companies with OTT, and they say, oh, we're going to get you this audience, but they need scale to deliver all the impressions. So they start to widen the net a little bit to bring more people in. And that's a good thing in some ways because we're trying to get broader. We want to be up the funnel a little bit. We don't want to be just at the bottom. But with that comes a loss of accuracy. So I think those modeled audiences trying to assume who's in market gets a little dicey. And again, there's value in it. But as we look at it, we want to create a full funnel solution. We want to hit people at the top of the funnel, get that broad reach, but then work down and get people that maybe have cut the cord and stepped outside that are harder to get. Now we can deterministically find them and be able to measure all the way up and down the funnel.
Joel, I asked a similar question to Nathan Hollenbeck. I don't know if you were in that room yesterday, but one of the big questions that we always that I always hear from marketers or dealers is like, how do I think about this? Is almost, it seems like two different strategies. You earlier kind of just said it's all kind of a part of one strategy. When do you choose to like think about the segmentation of the specific or broad strategy, and how much time and attention do you put to how you're splitting your efforts?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think I can answer for myself, and I'll answer more broadly. So for ourselves, our brand, we advertise the brand, right? So we have a play that is the general market, that is about the why buy for the entire group, that is non-commodity based, has nothing to do with what you being in the car market, and we believe has tremendous value to us in this specific, DMA or the DMAs that we practice in. And so that's one part of that strategy. That by nature has to be broad, because that is, I think spray and pray is a little aggressive because I want those to be verified impressions. But the reality becomes I'm looking for as many households and touch points as possible to create brand awareness in the entire market, as opposed to, that further down the funnel. But then when you get down that funnel, the segmentation and specificity that you're going to hit those customers with is based on what your data set available is. So if you don't have a vendor or a partner or someone that is using real-time behavioral data, if it's plugged into your website, it is. If it's plugged into other website, it is, like Clairvoy. That's who you want to go after, and that's where you're actually going down to the collateral level and saying these are customers who are shopping for cars that match my inventory. And the alternative is that kind of traditional model audience, and I'm sure everyone in this room has heard auto intender used to death, and just pick apart that for a little bit and ask them to turn that on and off, and you can see the discrepancy in those numbers. I was on a demo recently where I asked them, okay, turn off auto intender. What's the difference in impressions available? The number went from like 20 million to 21 million. I'm like, so you're saying 1 million people aren't shopping for a car? And that's just the latency inherently built into those modeled audiences is never going to be rectified unless you're going off of real-time behavioral data. So the segmentation becomes where you want to play. So if you're a dealer who's focused on a specific manufacturer, specific brand, I'd argue maybe you don't have a why buy that's effective for you to want that broad strategy. You really are focused on lower funnel. And then you kind of match those two, that budget to what your focus is. So it's more of a question of why at that point of the media buy as opposed to, the how.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong strategy, like the fact that you could think about, does my USP demand me focus on broad or more focused audience strategies? We're about halfway through. I want to remind everyone that there is Q&A available in the app. So if you do download the app, have questions for these guys, make sure to do that. I've got it. I'm refreshing it. If it makes sense to interject it or to put it to the end, I'll make sure and do that. I'll leave a few minutes there at the end. Yeah.
I was going to say, I just wanted to kind of double click on what Joel was saying about like real-time behavioral audiences. I think that is such a key point because so much of in-market audiences, it's like in-market for what, And so it's like, when you're talking to your providers, make sure that they are using real-time behavioral in-market auto shoppers. So I just wanted to just re-emphasize that because that's super important because there's a lot of confusion. Like I did a slide a few years ago where I profiled different providers out there, and it said that for one particular Toyota Highlander that there were 58 million in-market shoppers for a Toyota Highlander that you could buy.
Yeah. That is
pretty good.
Wild.
That's a popular car.
Go get them all.
Yeah, get it, buy
Spend the money. Yeah. Anthony, one thing that's interesting, I think, especially about effective, but also like we're starting to see more inventory specific, and not when I say inventory, I mean about the media buy, not about the vehicles. We're starting to see more inventory specific opportunities enter our industry singularly for a dealer, right? So like effective providing specific inventory on platform, right? Amazon providing specific inventory on platform. Others where historically, like 5-6 years ago, the conversation that I remember is like, you'd get an OTT provider and they'd just be like, we're everywhere. It's like, what's the difference between like someone is looking at a slide deck, they've got an OTT provider and they've got like 70 logos laid out on a screen saying we deliver against every single one of these places, and then the next difference on like when you connect that to a known user, and what does it take to change where the media buy is and how people should be talking to their agencies or their providers.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I think we look at it purely from the standpoint of an audience, and I'm not overly concerned what you're watching or where you're watching it. I can find you and deliver to you. So that is where we begin. And I think it's interesting when people talk about being in specific content, because that's sort of where TV began, right? It was like, I'm going to buy a show on prime time and I'm going to get a wide audience. And it's getting back to that to some degree because of how streaming companies are buying up more sort of beachfront type inventory with sports and things like that. So there's always going to be a place for that because it's high profile and it's engaging. But I think we're really shifting to who is your audience, how do we find them deterministically, and then how do we speak to them the right way? And we're going to continue to do that. I think the other key benefit is measuring that, right? It's nice to put a bunch of logos and say you're going to be everywhere, but how do we measure that audience that we just gave you? So can they match it back to ad exposure? That's one of the benefits we have, is after the campaign's over, we could see who we reached, and then we could see if that person took an action. So we're always going to lean on audience, and then the measurement that comes after that, and we'll mix in the beachfront property when and where we need to. But to me, that is going to be more valuable, the audiences.
I like the beachfront property. I'll take some of that, just a little bit. Steve, earlier on, Anthony said the word fraud, right? Yeah. And we don't think about fraud when it comes to advertising that much. Where is there fraud found today in audiences and ad delivery and the type of marketing we're going after?
I mean, there was, what was it, Forbes, MFA sites, made for advertising sites. I think that's a huge area of fraud. And I think it's part fraud and it's part just bad quality audiences. So I think that's the beautiful thing about like when you really are leaning into kind of what we kind of call authenticated audiences, that it's a real person that you're pushing an ad in front of. And so making sure that you're working with ad environments where they've got those authenticated users. And in effect, it reduces ad fraud to like virtually zero.
Yeah. Is a logged in user first of all, explain logged in user just a little bit more, and then is a logged in user like broad enough when you think about the fact that like that logged in user could be a different person in the family or something like that on a device? Like, how do you between your like broad strategy versus like, is that the right person in the household? How do we, make sure it's the right person? Like a ASOTU ad is hitting my kids on Disney Plus. Like, how do we know that we've got the right person, or is that still just a little bit too far for us?
Well, I think, at the CTV level, you have to target the household.
Yep.
So you don't really have a choice there. So, I think that's the trade-off, but I think it's a pretty good trade-off. But as far as like logged in or kind of authenticated audiences, it is people who you can verify that the device ID actually belongs to a real person. Even like registering for your app, you had everyone enter their email address. You didn't require people to have a password, but right. You authenticated that user, and so you knew it was a real person. And so it's all the little subtle ways that you can kind of authenticate that user, and I think that's key.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to a question just because it was asked here. Any suggestions on a percentage mix between upper, mid, and lower funnel targeting, or is that really so specific to the particular deal? Like, do you change that actually per your 9 rooftops, or is it much more of a broad corporate strategy? Or do you, I think both of you maybe have an answer to that, or all three.
I mean, for us, what we've measured so far in the addressable campaigns we've done is about 25 to 30% of the spend should go towards addressable, to make sure you're getting a broad reach. You're talking to people that you can bring into your brand and expose them to your brand. But then as you mix in that addressable, you're talking to people that maybe you didn't find originally. It's expanding your reach. And what we're seeing is the activity that comes from that addressable audience is very intense. So we'll measure conversions to sites, and about 75% of those conversions will happen in the first day. So we know that is a much more engaged audience. It's smaller. There's a smaller percentage of spend, but they're acting much quicker.
So why wouldn't you broaden the spend, or is it, or is there a trailing return at the percentage of spend when you get to that 30, 40% when you're not filling the top of funnel to get the addressable marketing down?
Exactly. Right? Your brand's out there, so they're aware of you, so they're more inclined to find you, because they got to take an action, right? They're sitting back, they're watching OTT on the big screen, they're watching linear, they still have to pick up a phone and take an action. So for them to do that on the first day, there's probably some awareness of your brand and understanding of the value that you provide.
Yeah. Steve, were you going to?
No,
you're like, nailed it.
Well, I was going to say is that's I think almost an impossible question to answer, in the sense that it really depends on the dealership group and how they function, or a single point, right? And if you don't necessarily have a brand to sell, then don't sell the brand. You know what I mean? It's, if the why buy is tied to the manufacturer you carry, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, focus on that audience and really, you know, like optimize for that, and don't focus on, you know, increasing the reputation of a store that doesn't have necessarily an identity. So, you know, it's the same thing with, like, you think of a company like CarMax, like what they've done with their brand and how they built it, and look at their advertising. It's never about a vehicle. They don't sell cars, they sell experience, right? And that's kind of generally the case for most, like, large brands we think of. They're almost product agnostic. They're focused on a user experience first, and everything else is secondary. So, like, for me, it's almost all brand. Like, there's almost nothing. So we don't delineate from the store. The only thing that should be different for us at every store is the address. Everything else should be identical, and it's the same inventory, same website, everything like that. But we're a relatively extreme example of that.
Yeah.
And one thing I did want to kind of mention specifically, where you kind of mix these two things with addressable, OTT, and attribution, is functionally we think about our OTT spend and using attribution not to prove the value of TV, because, and just to be clear, it is just TV. Like, don't think of it as digital and not digital. It's the same thing, right? You use these OTT metrics to find little spots where you over-index on results, and then you're no longer reliant on a behavioral party that's bringing in behavioral data. You're building your own data set to say, for some reason, and we have the use cases just like this, like, for some reason, Discovery Plus audience over-indexes on results based on attributed web visits to impressions. Like, I don't know why, but I could have paid for some, you know, built audience that happened to have that in there, and they would have shown success. But the reality is, for one reason or another, the audience watching that in this market is really, you know, they like our brand. I don't know why, but I'm going to buy more of that. You know, not less of other things, but more of that. And you can find those little wins for the entire stack of what you're spending on. We always focus our attribution on over-indexing on wherever I have a knob to turn. So whether that's creative, delivery network, and, you know, or DSP, whatever the thing is, whatever that little niche, that 1% delta, that's what I want to focus on and buy more of.
Yeah. One question that I have is, like, do you see benefits in a difference in creative in the two strategies? Or is it like, hey, it doesn't really matter the creative, it's more about having the separate strategies? Or have you seen results where one particular type of creative, depending on the broader or more specific audience, gets things moving faster?
Yeah, I think what's interesting for us is most of our inventory still ends up on a big screen, even our OTT, because of the premium quality that we have. But where we've seen OTT do really well is some more 15s, 15-second spots come in, and they will perform well just because of the nature of the viewing environment. But that's been it. I think for the most part, when you're on that big screen, you want to tell a great story. You want to be true to your brand. That will always win when you're true to your brand and you communicate that. It doesn't matter what environment it's in. I mean, obviously, if you're on TikTok and you got a few seconds, you want to do something else. But what we've seen is great creative will always stand out.
Steve, I want to get to this because we haven't talked about then. We talked a lot about the audience and the delivery, and you've talked about attribution, but when it comes to like tying this down to a lead or a sale, how do we make sure that we're set up on the front end to tie this to a lead or a sale, on the attribution side, and whether it's in a media mix or a specific ad? How do we start with the end in mind?
Yeah, I think you need to, look at ad environments where one, you can get access to the ad exposure logs. That's fundamental. If you're trying to measure ROI based upon click-throughs, well, CTV, that doesn't really exist. Video, maybe a few clicks and display the same way. So you need to be able to attribute at the ad exposure level. So one, you need to get ad exposure logs, which have different device IDs in them, and then you need to marry that with your sales or your leads that happen for that particular month, and so that requires utilizing different identity resolution partners to be able to enrich your data with these different device identifiers to be able to make that match back to the ad exposure log. I think the other interesting thing that we see a lot of times, just because we have our tag on all the marketplaces, is the peculiar behaviors, and we talked about this yesterday, when an ad exposure happens. This was for Nathan's first-party audience, so they weren't necessarily in market, but what Nathan was able to do is he targeted his audience, and then like 4 days later, that consumer visited a marketplace website. So that's like a super powerful KPI that you can begin to optimize on. So I think you have to.
That without a doubt, you would never get from a click log.
No.
And you would never know if that person never submitted a lead right into the CRM that someone could hopefully ask them at some point, how did you know about us, right? Like, totally. and so that's like you just can't get that, you know?
Yeah.
I do want to, you were a little bit quiet on I think a great question to be asking your agency or the platform that you're buying is, can I get the ad exposure logs with device IDs tied to them so that I can match that back to results in my identity resolution platform? Like, that's an extremely important question that you could write down if you haven't written it down.
Yeah, and you could pick that pretty quickly with an OTT vendor or even linear broadcast vendors. So we have attribution. Okay,
to what?
Are you doing to what exactly? The to what question, you'd be surprised. It's just it is, and then you kind of pull, and then really it ends up being some kind of version of effectively a modeled audience on an attributed web visit off of a GA4 log, which is just not even remotely what attribution, the word means. It's just a completely different thing. It's Nielsen, but on OTT. It's, you're taking 1,000 households and a DMA of 8 million people and saying this is the rating, but you're doing it on a 1-to-1 ratio off of website analytics. It's the same kind of poison.
Well, what I can say is this conversation I don't think was happening 3-4 years ago in our industry. And so if it seems kind of a little overwhelming or a little new, it is new. But it's a great opportunity if you're looking at trying to be more diligent with your ad spend, because what I do know and what I've experienced from talking to dealers and then industry partners that have dealers that are implementing these strategies is they're lowering their cost per sale, increasing their impressions, and understanding what media is actually having an impact on their bottom line more than ever. It's really interesting. I mentioned this yesterday, that we went from fearing the loss of cookies or fearing the loss of tracking or fearing the loss of all this stuff to actually heightening our awareness of our consumers' interactions with our ads, which is a really, really cool thing that you should be paying attention to in your dealership. Yes, you got one more thing.
One more thing. So as you talk to your agencies, there's a few caveats there. So with Google, you're not going to get the ad exposure logs. So you're going to have to create a data clean room data clean room environment with Ads Data Hub to be able to overlay the ad exposure logs with like DV360. Same thing goes with Amazon to where you'll have to do a data clean room to be able to measure the effectiveness. And then with Facebook, you're not going to get ad exposure logs from Facebook either. And so you have to use like CAPI to where you're pushing the conversions, the sales and leads data directly into Facebook so that you can get the ad exposure attribution for the person that viewed the ad on Facebook.
Yeah, so if you didn't understand any of those acronyms or anything, CAPI is actually Conversion API, so more people have heard that. And then Google has their clean room. It's the Google Ads Data Hub.
Yeah.
And then DV360
is Google's DSP.
Yep. So if you write those down and want to know more about them, probably those guys can help you out with that. But that is it's an extremely important delineation than like getting mad at your agency because they don't give you the ad exposure log. Thank you.
And for what it's worth too, that's the great thing about Effective. We can get the ad exposure logs from Effective to be able to do that measurement.
That's awesome.
Nailed it.
Well, hey.
I was just going to say one thing too. Is that
can.
this stuff sounds intimidating, but all this stuff sounds like it's big data, but actually it allows you to shrink it down. So
yes.
Isn't that wild?
The specifics of these things actually make this version of advertising more affordable than it's ever been before.
Yep.
Where you can actually truly be effective with a $2,500 budget and a targeted PMA, as opposed to before it was a little bit more. I hate saying spray and pray. I don't like how we use that word at all. But like that focus of like, well, I'm buying in your neighborhoods. You still have to spend more than you're ever going to possibly generate. Now you can be specific and effective.
Got
And I
it.
think I'll add my closing point too. We wouldn't be here without a lot of the partnerships that we've developed from events like this. And I think that's a place where we are leaning in. Is there is a lot of automotive ad tech out there that actually makes us look better, and we're looking to partner with those people to bring better data, better solutions. That's what we've done with Steve, and we're going to continue to look for that so that we can bring more to the entire industry.
That's an awesome closing statement because I think that's important. I mentioned that on the main stage today. Like if you're a partner in the room and this isn't just for dealers in the room. If you're a partner in the room and you want to figure out how to connect more with this stuff, these guys can help too. So thank them, appreciate them, ask questions if you have them. You got a 15-minute break till your next session. Thank y'all.